Thank you, Shannon, for everything. I wouldn't have made it through this without you. Shannon returned the sentiment by whispering in my own ear, no. Thank you, Patrick. You saved my little girl. I owe you a debt I can never repay in my lifetime. The feel of her breath against the skin of my neck and ear was electric and shot up and down my spine, literally standing my hair on end. I gave her one last squeeze to hold her tighter, which only made her cling to me tighter, too. We both sensed it was time and simultaneously eased our embrace. As we slowly pulled away from each other, Shannon gently cupped my face in her hands and kissed me gently on my left cheek. Goodbye and good night, Patrick. I'll see you in the morning. She left the room, but the scent of her was a presence there long after she was gone. I could barely concentrate the rest of the evening as I packed up my few belongings that I had with me. I at least had a set of black Minnesota Vikings sweats that I could wear when I left in the morning. And as much as I should have been anticipating the moment tomorrow when I got to leave, all I could think about was Shannon. Anticipation gripped me the rest of the night, and very little sleep came my way. At 9:30 the next morning, I was greeted by the entire nursing staff of my floor that was there along with a wheelchair. Brian, my steadfast nurse for the past umpteen weeks, was there to chauffeur me from my room to the front of the hospital. As we made our way down to the cavernous lobby and main entrance to the hospital, I was stunned to see several hundred well-wishers there to see me off. My entire medical team was there, as was the entire Mason County Sheriff's Department and Red River Falls Police Department, save for those who were actually on duty. A parade of police cruisers from both departments, as well as 2 fire trucks from Red River Falls Fire Department, was there to escort me to the city limits. Sheriff Bud Roberts was waiting with his department-issued Chevy Suburban, along with Clarissa, Nick, and Jake, to take me home. Waiting near the Suburban were Shannon and Bridget. I stood from my wheelchair and picked up Bridget for one last big hug, while dozens of photographers and videographers from the local media captured the moment. Bud, of course, shook my hand and was all smiles for the camera. Clarissa did her best to play the part, too, but Nick and Jake actually were genuinely happy to see me. Clarissa immediately turned and climbed in the front passenger seat next to Bud, while I took the back seat with my boys taking a spot on either side of me. The cavalcade of police and fire trucks, with lights flashing and sirens blaring, took off from the hospital with well-wishers lining both sides of the lane, extending from the main entrance all the way to Enterprise Avenue, the main drag that follows US Highway 120 through Red River Falls. I looked over my shoulder, happy to have Holy Family Regional Medical Center getting smaller in my sight. We turned right on US Highway 120 and headed south towards the direction of home. Even away from the hospital, there were still small groups of well-wishers holding signs, flags, and banners. I was overwhelmed with emotion by the outpouring of support. Nick and Jake did their best to point out each and every one of them so I wouldn't miss a thing. As we approached the high school campus on the south side of Red River Falls, the police cars and fire trucks peeled off into the parking lot and Bud continued onward towards home. Well, how does the hero feel today? Bud asked, looking at me in his rearview mirror. Better than I deserve, I smiled back. I can't thank you enough for everything, Bud. I really appreciate you bringing my family to me today. Oh, there was nothing to it, Pat. It was the least I could do. He smiled at Clarissa, who smiled back, and then returned his gaze to the road. What did you think about all the people who turned out? That was really something, wasn't it? Unbelievable, I replied. How in the world did everyone know I was getting out today? That's the part one can't figure out. I know word travels fast, but not that fast. It was on the website, Dad, Nick replied. You know, Jake answered, the one they set up for you. I was puzzled. I knew nothing about any website. It's called Caring Bridge, Nick informed me. They set it up to tell everybody how you were doing after you got hurt. Did you set that up, Clarissa? I asked. No, Danny Larson and some of the others did, she answered. There's even a Facebook page, Dad, Jake said proudly. You got over 100,000 likes and over 10,000 comments from people. Wow. Well, this is the internet age. I wasn't sure how I felt about total strangers knowing about my medical progress, but I was genuinely warmed and touched by the outpouring of care and concern. About 10 miles south of Red River Falls, Bud turned the big SUV west onto Rattlesnake Road, the gravel road our acreage was on. The scenery all looked intimately familiar, and I anticipated the next hill and our small farm that lay just beyond. The sight of our house was like seeing an old friend for the first time in ages. Even the older outbuildings and hay shed were welcome sights. Bud pulled the Suburban up to the old outbuilding with sliding doors that currently served as our garage. It was almost 80 years old but still had good bones and kept the snow off our vehicles in the winter. We all made our exits from the vehicle. With the boys on each side of me, I made the short walk over to the edge of the horse corral I had built and clicked my tongue several times to summon our horses to the fence. My trusty friend and favorite horse, Blackjack, made his way over to me and started to nuzzle my cheek with his nose. He gave me a few good sniffs, just to make sure I was who he thought I was. When he was satisfied, he lowered his head as usual to let me give him a good scratching of his ears, which he loved so much. With luck, my rehabilitation would continue to go well, and I could still get a fair amount of horseback riding in before winter arrived with all of its frigid fury. The boys and I spent about 10 minutes or so petting the horses before heading back up to the house. Our farmhouse was over 80 years old too, but still in great shape. The only major change we had to make in the few years we had lived there was replacing the old boiler with a new and more efficient one. With 5 bedrooms, there was more than enough room for all of us and our respective hobbies. Well, Bud started. I guess it is about time for me to head back home. I promised my wife I'd take her out for a nice lunch today. I'm sure you all could use the time to get settled back in. Thanks a lot, Bud, I said, extending my hand. Bud gripped it firmly. I really appreciate everything. No, Patrick, I appreciate everything you have done. Don't feel like you have to rush back too soon. Just focus on the rest of your rehab and getting yourself back to 100%. The job will take care of itself in the meantime. Be sure to tell Margot I said hello and that we missed her today, I said as Bud turned to go. Margot was short for Margoline. She and Bud had been married almost 25 years. Yeah, I'll do that, Patrick. She wanted me to tell you how happy she is for all of you, and she'll see you real soon. She had an appointment today she couldn't miss. Otherwise, she would have been there. I didn't press for information and Bud left without much fanfare. Well, I'm gonna go start getting our own lunch ready, Clarissa said and disappeared into the kitchen. I took it easy the rest of the weekend, since I knew I had a full week of rehab ahead of me and it would only get more and more intense as it went on. I had at least another month of it ahead of me before I could get back to work full-time, and even that was an optimistic schedule. But I had beaten the odds so far, and I was determined to this time as well. Clarissa and I were cordial with one another, but otherwise it was business as usual. I tried to initiate lovemaking several times, but it was a barrage of excuses as always. She was either having a bad day with her low testosterone symptoms and just wasn't feeling like it, was tired from a new volunteer project she had started with the Red River Nature Trails Committee, or she was afraid that I might get hurt because of my injuries. I had to chuckle at the last excuse. The resentment continued to build along with the tension between us. At one point, I got snippy and pissy with her over the lack of action in the bedroom again and told her I was sick of all the excuses. Well, I'm so sorry that you feel your sexual wants seem to outweigh, in your mind, my overall physical health needs, she said emphatically. I was getting tired of her shoving her ongoing low testosterone problems in my face all the time. A problem she could easily have corrected with a prescription from her doctor, but chose to treat herself with herbal and natural remedies, which did nothing. She also said that there were plenty of couples out there who were married and didn't have sex that often because their focus was on their lives, jobs, and kids, and there wasn't anything wrong with that. I said, Clarissa, there are a hell of a lot of couples out there who have sex more than we do who still get divorced because of a lack of sex in their marriage. Well, I guess you have a decision to make then, she said and stormed off to our room. The only outlet I had, besides an occasional sneak peek at some spicy sights and jerking off in the shower, was going to my daily workout and physical therapy. At least getting a good workout took some of the edge and stress off. After I had been home for a month, I was allowed to go back to work on light duty, which meant being a paper pusher and assisting some of the other deputies with their reports. I had physical therapy now 3 days a week for 2 hours in the morning, and then spent the rest of the day at the sheriff's office. Along with several other deputies in the department and several outside candidates, I ended up submitting my packet to be considered for the captain and chief deputy position that had been vacated by Floyd Franklin. The packets were reviewed by a committee of personnel from various departments around the county and the city. I knew that my college degrees in criminal justice and psychology, as well as my military service, would make me a formidable candidate. Having saved Bridget wasn't going to hurt me, either. The committee took 2 weeks to consider all the applications, during which each candidate had to sit in front of the committee to answer a battery of questions during a panel interview. Some of the questions were tough and pointed, others were kind of laughable. Sometimes, when you bring in personnel who have zero law enforcement experience to interview an actual law enforcement officer, some of the questions you get are clearly based on what that individual has seen on TV and in movies. But they all meant well and did their very best to choose a candidate. In the end, the selection committee selected who they believed was the best candidate and submitted the name to Sheriff Roberts, who made the final decision. I was working on organizing some old reports on a Monday after I had gotten to work following rehab. I was just getting settled into a day's worth of boring and mind-numbing work when Bud came out of his office. "Hey, Pat, what are you working on?" Bud asked. I let out a long sigh and gave Bud a weak smile. "Just taking some of these old handwritten reports and entering them digitally into the new system." Bud winced. He knew the work was brutal and hated having to make deputies spend part of their time each month getting it caught up. Even though these crime and incident reports were so old, the state mandated that all records going back 15 years had to be entered into the state database. This sucked because all of the neighboring states only mandated 10 years, and the national standard was only 7. Any unresolved felony cases, no matter how old, were also required to be updated and entered digitally into the state database. No one had even begun to touch that stack of cold case files, which also entailed re-establishing chain of custody for any evidence gathered in those cases. "Well, why don't you take a break and step into my office for a bit?" Bud offered. I welcomed the break from the blinding paper and computer work and said, "Gladly." I followed Bud the few short steps down the hall to his office and seated myself in one of 2 short-backed leather swivel chairs in front of his large oak desk. A large computer desk sat directly behind Bud's executive leather chair and looked comically large as Bud preferred to use a laptop computer instead of a desktop. Bud had, like any good sheriff or police chief, numerous pictures, plaques, and awards plastering his walls that highlighted his nearly 30-year career in law enforcement. Like me, Bud's career had begun with the Red River Falls Police Department, where he had served for over 18 years, rising to the rank of lieutenant before winning his first term as sheriff. Bud had won 3 of those terms so far and wasn't even facing a challenge from anyone in next year's election. "Pat, as you know, the committee has assisted me over the past few weeks by reviewing the applications and conducting interviews for the position of Captain and Chief Deputy Sheriff," Bud began. "I have in my hand their report and recommendation of the individual they would like to see appointed to that position." Bud handed me a vanilla folder containing the report. I opened the folder and scanned the cover letter that sat on top of the stack of evaluations for each candidate. I quickly shifted my focus to the last paragraph of the letter. "Therefore, the selection committee has made the decision to recommend Deputy Sheriff Sean Patrick Quinn to fill the vacant position of Captain and Chief Deputy of the Mason County Sheriff's Department. The committee trusts that Sheriff William Roberts will give all due concern and consideration to this recommendation and will make final appointment to the position based on the information contained in this report. The committee members would like to extend their thanks to the sheriff, his department, and to the Mason County Board of Supervisors for seeking our helping in fulfilling this essential task. Respectfully submitted. Director, Red River Falls Public Works. Selection Committee Chairman." Wow, I couldn't believe it. I had felt fairly confident going into the process that I would make a strong candidate, but I knew there were other deputies, as well as members of the Red River Falls PD, who had applied for the position and would have made good captains as well. One of those candidates was Pete Sturgeon, a current captain on the Red River Falls PD, who I knew would probably not take the news well. Pete knew that Bud and I had been friends going all the way back to our days on the Red River Falls PD, too. Bud reached his hand across the table. "Congratulations, Captain. I'm proud to say this was a recommendation that wasn't difficult to accept." I gripped the sheriff's hand firmly in reply. "Thank you, Sheriff. I won't let you down." We chatted for a few more minutes, and he told me that the formal announcement of my promotion would take place that afternoon around 14:30 as the day shift was ending and the deputies from the night shift would be arriving for work. "Now," Bud said, "I would imagine that someone's wife and kids would love to hear this news." "I can't wait to tell them," I said, grinning stupidly. I hadn't been this giddy since the day I got married. "Just so you know," Bud cautioned, "if you think your days of doing paperwork are over, think again. There's a lot more of that which comes with the job. You're going to be the direct supervisor to all of the lieutenants and deputies, as well as the tactical officer for the Narcotics Task Force and Special Operations Group. You'll also be handling the preparation of warrants and occasionally serving warrants, too." I know, but the chance to keep normal hours and be home for dinner almost every night is worth it," I said. "Congratulations, Patrick. I look forward to working with you even more closely," Bud said as he waved me out of his office. "Captain Pat Quinn, Chief Deputy Pat Quinn." I kept saying them over and over in my mind, hoping that soon it would sound normal. I guess a lot of things take some time in getting used to. I decided I needed to keep my focus and return to my desk to continue digitizing reports. The next thing I knew, Bud was by my side again and pulled up a chair. "One more thing, Pat," he said, looking intent. "I forgot to tell you that I'm going to be sending you to a 2-week training course in Minneapolis. It is an executive law enforcement officer professional development and leaders initiative course. It gets put on by the Federal Law Enforcement Academy. Instead of sending everybody to Georgia all the time, They're doing outreach classes around the country. They just finished one in Cheyenne, and they'll be holding the next one in the Twin Cities in about 2 weeks. It'll be a good way for you to get your feet wet at the next level. Wow, sounds intense, I said as Bud stood back up. It's not. It is tough from an intellectual and educational standpoint. But the course is almost entirely classroom-oriented with a few tabletop exercises thrown in for fun, Bud explained. Oh, goody, I said dryly. Death by PowerPoint. Bud patted me on my left shoulder. Welcome to the next level, Pat, he chuckled as he walked away. I just wanted to let you know, so you can give the family a heads up that you're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. But the hotel and the meals are on us. And if it makes you feel any better, I'll be there going through it with you. Not really, I chuckled. I returned to my computer. A promotion and an out-of-town training conference, I thought. Maybe the 2-week separation would do me and Clarissa some good, and give us both some time to think. At shift change that afternoon, Sheriff Roberts called all of the deputies and staff members into the briefing room to announce my promotion to captain and chief deputy. He kept it short and sweet and asked everyone to give me a round of applause. Everyone clapped, but I couldn't help but notice that the applause was more tepid than I was expecting. I knew several of the deputies had also applied for the position, so I chalked up the response to a few of them being a little butthurt over my selection. I wasn't going to let it get me down, and at 1600, I hopped in my truck and headed home. Clarissa was helping the boys with their homework when I walked into the house and dinner was in the oven. How was work? Clarissa asked. Interesting, I replied cryptically. Oh, how so? I thought they had you going blind on old paperwork, she said, puzzled. Yeah, I was. But there was a development just before noon. Are you going to tell me? She begged. Or are you going to just play 20 questions? I draped my jacket on the back of one of the dining room chairs before answering. The selection committee gave their recommendation to Bud for the captain and chief deputy position. Bud accepted their recommendation and subsequently offered me the position. What? Clarissa asked, completely startled. Chief deputy? That's like number 2 in the department, right? Yes, it is. So, it is the sheriff and then you, right? She said, trying to figure something out in her head. Yes, it is, I said slowly, trying to see where she was going with this. Are you not happy about this or something? No, it's not that. It's just, I guess, wow, was all she could stutter. Do I at least get a hug for my promotion? I asked with my arms outstretched. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's just such a surprise, Clarissa said as she embraced me. I had been hoping for the same sparks I got from hugging Shannon, but Clarissa pulled away too quickly. She then stood there with a closed-off posture with her arms folded. Well, I just want you to know there are going to be some changes, I started to explain. My workday will resemble more office hours than what I had previously. My general workday follows county business and runs from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., same as the courthouse. However, with my new duties, there will probably times I will need to be in earlier and stay later. I'll get comp time, of course, but there will also be a lot more meetings, including weekends. Will you mostly know ahead of time? Clarissa asked. For the most part, but you just never know. There will also be some out-of-town travel occasionally around the state and elsewhere, beginning with a leadership training seminar that I will be gone 2 weeks for at the beginning of November. Like how often? She wanted to know. Hard to say, I said, grabbing a soda from the fridge. I would imagine that some parts of the job will be routine in a lot of ways, and I'll get the hang of things as time goes by. Clarissa got quiet. What about the dangerous stuff? She asked. I let out a sigh and said, well, for the most part that is done. Obviously, I won't be patrolling anymore, so that rules out car stops and chases. But part of my duties will be to serve as the executive officer in charge of the Narcotics Task Force and Special Operations Group. So, you'll still be kicking down doors and busting crack and meth houses, she said, getting defensive. Not exactly, I tried to reassure her. As the officer in charge, my responsibilities will be more along the lines of tactical planning and oversight. Sure, I'll still dress and look the part, just in case things go to shit all of a sudden. But for the most part, one won't be the sharp end of the stick anymore. Good, she said, seemingly soothed. So will there be a decent pay increase with your new position? I chuckled and nearly choked as she asked me the question while taking a swig of my cola. You sure get down to the point, don't you? I said, wiping my chin. Well, I would think there'd be a bump in pay, isn't there? After all, you're going to have a lot more responsibilities and such. They'd better pay you more. Easy, easy, I said calmingly. My salary as a patrol deputy, as you know, was a little over $55,000 a year. The salary of chief deputy is $89,000 a year. Oh my God, Clarissa exclaimed. I was expecting a bump in pay, but not a $34,000 bump in pay. Well, you gotta understand that I was selected and promoted over the sergeants and lieutenants on the department. That's 2 pay bumps right there. We all sat down together for dinner about an hour later and chatted more about my new position and duties. For the first time in a long while, the atmosphere in our house was genuinely warm. I didn't get any celebratory sex that night, but when she came to bed, Clarissa actually did snuggle up next to me and gave me a kiss goodnight, which was more than I had gotten in the weeks since I had been home from the hospital. I didn't push things much over the next week or so, but I did start to get a little anxious in the days leading up to the law enforcement conference in the Twin Cities. I brought home flowers for Clarissa, which she accepted with a smile. But at least she didn't throw me any snide remarks about it being an open gesture expecting sex, which was what usually happened when I brought home flowers. Over the last year or more, any traditional romantic gestures were taken by Clarissa as an expectation of sex, and she had begun to resent them. I had always thought that women appreciated little gifts, flowers, and other tokens of affection, but Clarissa always assumed there were strings attached. Finally, it was the night before I was to leave for the conference. I couldn't take it anymore. It had been over 5 months at that point since Clarissa and I had made love. I was afraid if I left for the conference without at least one last moment of true physical connection and emotional bonding that Clarissa and I were done for. I had been packing my clothes when Clarissa came into the bedroom looking for something in her hope chest. I slowly walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist and hugged her from behind. She didn't withdraw, but simply placed her hands and arms on my own and accepted the embrace. I kissed her gently on her ear. Clarissa turned around and hugged me with her head on my chest. "I want to make love to you before I leave, Clarissa," I whispered. "Patrick, please. Please don't," she said, pulling away from me. I stood there deflated. I was out of options and out of patience. "What?" I demanded. "What is the problem?" Clarissa sat down on the edge of the bed, arms folded and looking away from me. "What do you expect from me, Clarissa?" I said even louder. "What has happened over the last few years that all of a sudden you find me absolutely repulsive?" "I should ask you the same thing, Patrick," she retorted. "What exactly do you expect from me? It's like you expect me to stay home, cook and clean, take care of the boys, and be at your sexual beck and call all the time." "You know," I said, forcing myself to calm down, "if we had sex an average of once a month, I might just consider your point. And that's a pretty big might. You're not the only one who has been affected by everything the last few months, you know," Clarissa said, desperately looking for a point to make. "This whole thing has affected me too. Do you know what it has been like for me? Do you know what it has been like almost being a widow before I'm even in my mid-30s? Having to consider the possibility of being alone for the rest of my life, with 2 boys to raise on my own? Don't use the boys as an excuse for this, Claire," I hissed. "We are talking about problems that have been ongoing for the last couple of years. This isn't just something that occurred with the shooting, and you damned well know it." "Oh, I'm so sorry," Clarissa moaned, overly dramatic. "I'm so sorry that my health needs don't seem to take precedent over your need to get laid," she said, gesturing grandly to make her point. "Did you ever stop to think about what was best for me?" Yes, I have. And what is best for you would be to talk to your doctor and get a prescription to fix the problem. There is no shame in getting treatment for a medical condition, Clarissa." I tried to reason. "The last thing I want to do is pump my body full of drugs and chemicals, Patrick," she said. "You know how those things affect my body." I shook my head. "Sounds like an excuse. And I'm tired of making excuses for you, and I'm tired begging and pleading for something that should be a normal and regular part of our marriage. If you truly gave a shit about me, Clarissa," I said, resuming my packing, "you'd do something about this instead of just make excuses. And if you gave a shit about me," she shot back, "you'd want what is best and natural for me, and not want me to do something that I'm not comfortable with. All you're thinking of is yourself and what you want." I was tired of it all. I decided right then and there that I was going to take the 2 weeks I would be away in the Twin Cities to figure out what I was going to do, what my next move would be when I came home. If this is what my life was going to be like, then I wanted no part of it. Being on an acreage out in the country wasn't worth being miserable for the rest of my life, and losing the acreage was almost a certainty if it came down to getting a divorce. Suddenly, the thought of that didn't scare me. It should have, but it didn't. The idea actually had a calming effect on me once I accepted it. Clarissa noticed that I hadn't said anything for a few minutes as I ignored her and continued to pack. Finally, the sound of silence became too much for her, and she had to ask, "What, Patrick? What do you want from me?" she queried. I stopped packing, stood up straight, and let out a long sigh. "I'll tell you what I want, Clarissa. I said, sitting next to her. I want a wife that wants me to be an equal part of the marriage. I want a wife who is willing to receive affection from me and give it in return. I want a wife who will accept romantic gestures from me and not automatically attach some ulterior motive to it. I want a wife whose skin doesn't crawl when I want to touch her. I want a wife who doesn't arbitrarily refuse me 99% of the time when I want to make love to her, because I love her, and because after almost 15 years of marriage I still find her as beautiful and as sexy as the day I first met her. What I want is to have my wife back, the woman I fell in love with, not the shell of a human being that has no ability to give or receive love to her husband. All you are to me anymore is just a ghost of the woman I fell in love with. I keep hoping she will return, but that hope dies a little more every single day. I stood up, closed my suitcase, and set it near the door to the bedroom. I proceeded to hang up 3 clothes bags containing my 3 suits, as well as 2 complete sets of uniform on the hook behind the door. Clarissa sat there with tears in her eyes and said nothing. I had hoped she would at least say something, but I got crickets in return. You'll have the bed to yourself for the next couple of weeks anyway, I said softly, so you might as well have it to yourself tonight. Clarissa just sat there sobbing now. I grabbed a few blankets from the hall closet and a spare pillow and made my way downstairs to the living room, where I made myself as comfortable as I could on the couch. My alarm went off precisely at 4:30 the next morning. The conference wasn't scheduled to start until 10 o'clock, so I had plenty of time to grab a shower, dress, and leave for the conference. I opted to shower in the main bathroom rather than the master bath, so I wouldn't wake Clarissa. When I finished showering, I dressed in a pair of khaki dress slacks, dress shirt, tie, and a tan Western-style blazer that I had purchased. I opted for a pair of brown leather Tony Lama square-toed boots that I had treated myself to shortly after my promotion. Now that I was captain and chief deputy, Bud had insisted that I wear suits to work rather than a typical duty uniform. I finished loading my clothes in my vehicle and went back in the house to gently give each of the boys a quick smooch on the head. They were both still sleeping soundly at this hour, and I didn't want to wake them to say goodbye. I had promised each of them the night before that I would call them the first night and regularly while I was gone. As I was getting ready to leave, I noticed Clarissa standing at the front door, still dressed in her pajamas and a robe. I reached for the door and was about to get back out of the car, but I was struck by a feeling that I shouldn't. Only one of 2 things was going to happen. Either I would make a fool of myself and try to make up for the night before, or she would simply give me a thread of hope to falsely cling to while I was gone. I sat there for a few moments before putting the big Ford in gear and pulling out of the driveway and onto Rattlesnake Road. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I could still see her form by the front door as I crested the hill before my home disappeared from sight. As I approached US Highway 120, I wondered if that was the last time that I would see my home before I made a decision to divorce my wife. It took over 3 hours to drive from my house outside of Red River Falls to the Twin Cities. I hit the tail end of rush hour traffic and made very good time to get to the hotel. Luckily, the conference was at the same hotel, so I wouldn't need to go far for anything. The sheriff's department paid for my room, meals at the hotel, and I was given an expense account at the hotel for dry cleaning and laundry service during the time I was going to be there. Bud Roberts was also going to be attending, so I thought I would look up his room as I approached the front desk to check in. It was just after 9 a.m., and the conference didn't begin for almost another hour. "I'm sorry," the desk clerk said. "I'm not showing anyone by that name as a guest here." "Really?" I said, puzzled. "His actual name is William Roberts. Maybe there is a Will or Bill Roberts." The desk clerk typed away on his computer. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not showing anyone with that last name as a guest in the hotel at this time. I don't even show anyone with that name as having a reservation here." Weird, I thought. Maybe Bud had decided to check into another hotel instead. Oh well, I guess I would have to see him at the conference instead. I took my belongings directly upstairs to the 8th floor where my room was. I slid the key card into the slot and pushed the door open. The room contained a single king-size bed, sleeper sofa, deluxe bathroom with jacuzzi tub, and a small office workstation with in-room Wi-Fi. There was also a large-screen TV, microwave, refrigerator, and a coffee maker with about 24 varieties of coffee to choose from. All in all, it wasn't a bad place to have to shack up for the next 2 weeks. It would be tough, but I was pretty sure I could handle it. At 9:45, I made my way down to the conference center. I wasn't dressed too official, but it didn't take much to make me as a law enforcement officer. I had a miniature badge pin on my right lapel, a U.S. flag on my left lapel, and my official sheriff's badge secured to my belt, which was in plain view. A handful of the other participants were dressed in their work uniforms, but most were dressed like me. The brochures for the conference stated expressly that firearms were absolutely forbidden on the hotel property, and that no excuses or explanations would be accepted for carrying a weapon during the conference. I looked around at the registration table as I signed in for the conference. I was able to locate Bud's name tag, so he had obviously not signed in to the conference yet. I decided to wait near the entrance to the main conference hall for him to show up. It was difficult to stand there because I had been handed an armload of course materials for the entire 2 weeks of the conference. At 9:55, Bud still hadn't shown up yet, and I decided to go ahead and take a seat. The conference kicked off punctually at 10 o'clock with the keynote speaker, a retired deputy police commissioner for the city of Chicago who spoke until 11:45. The conference broke early for lunch with the afternoon seminar scheduled to begin again at 1:15. I left my seat in the conference room and went out into the vacuous main lobby of the hotel to try and give Bud a call and find out where he was at. The phone rang twice before picking up. "Bud Roberts," he answered. "Hey, Bud, this is Patrick. Where are you? I missed you at registration." "Ah, hell, Patrick. I've got a mess to take care of back here," he replied. "I have an emergency meeting with the county supervisors. They're looking at amending the budget for next year and looking at the possibility of cutting 3 deputies. I've got to try and convince them to pull their heads out of each other's butts and get a dose of reality. I'm hoping to get to the conference by tomorrow or Wednesday at the latest. How's this going there, anyway?" "Oh, fine, I guess," I said. "We only had the first session this morning, and it was a former deputy commissioner from Chicago who talked about leadership excellence and stuff. You know, the usual rah-rah stuff to fire up the troops," I said, pacing the lobby floor. "Well, it should be good experience for you, Pat. I'm sure you'll come home with all kinds of ideas we can use." Odd, I thought. It almost sounded like he wasn't planning on coming here at all. "Anyway," he continued, "wish me luck dealing with these a-holes. Hope to see you later this week. Bye." "Yeah, take care now," I said, ending the call. Great, just great. My home life was in a world of shit, and I was hoping to at least have a friend I could talk to about it while I was here. I was going to have to wallow and stew in my own self-pity for the next few days at least. And that was only if Bud decided to show up at all. I had a light lunch in the smallest of the hotel's 3 restaurants. There were a few other people from the conference in there eating as well, but I chose to sit at a small table by myself so I could think. The afternoon session ran from 1:15 to 4:30, and the first day of the conference had come to a close. I attended an evening mixer in one of the banquet halls and nursed a Jack and Coke while I made small talk with some of the other attendees. I knew a few people here and there. The world of law enforcement can be fairly small at times, and you tend to meet officers from all over. The majority of the attendees were from Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, but at least 3 of them came all the way from Denver, Colorado. For a few hours, at least, I enjoyed the kinship that can only be found among the fraternity of police officers. I retired to my room around 8:30. I made a call home so I could talk to the boys, and we got to chat for about half an hour. Nick had decided that he wanted to play basketball this winter and asked me if we could go shopping for new basketball shoes as soon as I got home. Jake repeated the story of Nick playing basketball, along with the fact that he was pissed that he didn't get to play too. I told him that if it made him feel better, I would buy him a pair of basketball shoes, too, and that I would put a basketball hoop in the hay barn so we could shoot baskets inside even during the winter. Even as I told him that, I silently asked myself if I wasn't in fact lying to my son as I spoke the words. Even still, Jake was satisfied and promised that he would stop hating his brother for getting to play basketball. Nick got back on the phone to say goodbye after I got done speaking with Jake. Nick asked me if I wanted to talk to their mom, but I said that tonight I just wanted to talk to my boys. "Are you and Mom mad at each other?" Nick asked pointedly. Even from several hundred miles away, the question hit me like a punch in the gut. Why would you ask that? Kids are a lot more intuitive than we ever give them credit for. "It just seems like it," he said quietly. "Don't worry," I tried to reassure him. "There's nothing for you to be concerned about." "Then why don't you want to talk to Mom?" he asked point blank. Damn, this kid wasn't going to let me off easy. "Well," I began, "your mom and I get to talk all the time. We talked a lot last night, and I got to see her this morning before I left. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. I hoped it would at least be enough to get me by for now." "Yeah, okay. Will you call tomorrow?" Nick asked. "Absolutely. I will, buddy. Already looking forward to it. You get some sleep now. You're gonna need it if you decide to play basketball," I encouraged. "Okay, Dad. Talk to you tomorrow. Love you." "I love you too, little buddy. Give your mom and your brother a hug for me." "Okay? I will. I promise," he said. "Good night," I replied as I hung up the phone. Geez, even the kids were starting to pick up on the tension. Things needed to change between my wife, and they needed to change fast. The question was, would they change for the better or change for the worse? I guess that I wouldn't have my answer until I got home next week. Sleep came quicker than I had anticipated, helped in part, I'm sure, to the Jacks and Coke that I had imbibed at the conference mixer. Much to my relief, Bud finally showed up the next morning. He ended up getting a room at an adjacent motel for some reason, but he and I were still able to have breakfast and lunch together in my hotel. In the evenings, Bud ended up spending time with a number of other police chiefs and sheriffs who were also in attendance. Some of them he knew, and some of them he met at the conference. A large group of them got together in the evenings for drinks and dinner, which was fine with me. It was just good to have a friend to hang out with. I didn't talk much about my issues back home. Trying to put the best face on things for my boss seemed like a good idea. I had decided when I left for the conference that I was just going to leave all my problems back on the farm. Either things between Clarissa and I would improve while I was gone, or they wouldn't. And if they didn't, then I guess it would make what I was contemplating a lot easier to allow happen. Bud and I sat next to each other during the class session, but didn't chat much at breaks. Bud was big into networking, or basically just shaking hands and greasing palms. He told me that you had to be a bit of a politician to be sheriff, and know how to understand and work with the other elected politicians. In Mason County, that meant working with and dealing with the Board of Supervisors. They had been the reason for his delay in getting to the conference in the first place. There were only 3 of them Bud had to deal with, but, in his words, every single one of them was a proctologist's dream. A major a-hole. The next 3 days of the conference went by quickly. The weekend seminars for the conference were morning sessions only, so that the attendees could have the chance to see some of the Twin Cities while they were in town. There was even a group trip to see the Minnesota Wild play at the Xcel Energy Center, which all of us were greatly looking forward to. Friday at lunch, Bud received a phone call just as we were getting ready to order. He left our table to take the call and was gone for about 10 minutes. When he came back, he was visibly upset. "Bad news, Pat," he said, sitting back down. "I'm gonna have to eat and run. More trouble with the supervisors. If I don't meet with them, they're not going to put the new jail proposal on the ballot next year." "Ouch," I replied. "Can they really do that?" "Damned right they can," Bud said, taking a sip of coffee. "Anything that goes on a referendum for a county election has to be approved by them first. And God knows we need that new jail." I knew that Bud was between a rock and a hard place. He was absolutely right about the new jail. Currently, a good chunk of the corrections budget was going towards housing prisoners in prisons out of the county. Prisoners were currently being housed as far away as Choctaw County, when they had the room themselves, and several more were being held in Lakota and Iroquois counties as well. Both of those counties charge Mason County approximately $80 per day to house one prisoner. Considering the fact that we currently had 10 prisoners being housed in Lakota County right now with an average stay of 10 days apiece, it was costing the taxpayers an average of $800 per day and $5,600 per week and over $20,000 per month. And that was just for one county. Still, it seemed odd that Bud would have to leave right this moment. By the time he fought through afternoon rush hour traffic in Minneapolis, it would be well into the evening before he got home. I chalked it up to the old adage that a lawman's job is never done. But the thought still bothered me, and I wasn't quite sure why. The Friday sessions ended, as usual, at 4:30, and I headed straight up to my room to change. I had decided to head over and check out the Mall of America and hit up a store there called Legoland that one of the attendees had told me about. Both Nick and Jake were huge Lego fans, and I thought that I would surprise them and get them each something super cool to put together and play with when I came home. Sort of a, sorry I was gone for 2 weeks, kind of gift for them. When I reached my hotel room, I noticed that one of the lights on the hotel phone was blinking, indicating that I had a message. I picked up the phone and contacted the front desk. "Front desk, this is Adam speaking," came the greeting over the phone. "Yes, this is Patrick Quinn in room 832. Do you have a message for me?" I asked. "One moment, please," the clerk replied as he searched for the message. "Mr. Quinn?" "Yes, I'm here," I replied. "Yes, Mr. Quinn, I have a message for you. A Ms. Caroline Bennett called for you and asked that you return her call as soon as possible," he replied. "Caroline? My mother-in-law? What in the world could she possibly want?" I hadn't seen much of her since she moved to the cities. I grabbed a pen and quickly jotted down the number the desk clerk gave me. So, I called her. The phone rang almost 5 times before it picked up. "Hello?" came a female voice. "Caroline?" I asked almost sheepishly. "Patrick. Oh, I'm so glad that you returned my call." She sounded genuinely excited. "Well, the afternoon session of the conference ended, and I thought I would give you a shout before I headed out for some dinner in a bit," I explained. "Oh dear. Did you have plans this evening?" she asked. "Oh, no, I half stammered. There's several restaurants in the hotel, plus the Mall of America is almost within walking distance from here." "Oh my God," she exclaimed. Stay away from the mall. Nothing but an overpriced tourist trap and an eyesore. Even the airport is more pleasing to look at than the mall, she giggled. Okay, I chuckled. If you say so. Speaking of dinner, she went on, if you don't have plans tonight, then Martin and I want to treat you to dinner. It has been ages since I have gotten to see you, and I need to catch up with you on how Clarissa and the boys are doing. Well, I reasoned. Sounds good to me. Where would you like to meet? I hope you don't mind, she started. But I already took the liberty of getting a reservation at the Chez Stefan. The Chez Stefan was the high-end restaurant located here in the hotel. It was the restaurant that was not one of the dining choices that I was given by the department and not the type of place frequented by someone collecting a taxpayer-funded salary. It was the kind of restaurant where the prices weren't even on the menu because if you had to ask how much it cost, you couldn't afford it. Well, that's a little out of my league, I reasoned. Nonsense, love. You came all this way and you deserve a hero's welcome and a meal fit for a king. And Martin and I are going to treat you as such while you are here. I won't hear otherwise, and your money is no good as long as you are with us. Well, I guess it was decided. Okay, Caroline. You win. I'd be delighted, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you and meeting Martin. When should I plan to be there? I asked. Martin and I will be arriving for drinks around 8 o'clock, and our dinner reservation is for 8:30. Martin detests early meals, and so do I, she finished. Okay, great. 8 it is. I'll see you there, I said, getting ready to hang up. Perfect. Oh, and Patrick? Yes, I replied. There was a pause before she continued. I am really looking forward to seeing you tonight, she said with a voice full of anticipation. Me too, was all I could say. Okay, see you soon, she nearly purred. I hung up the phone and prepared myself. Caroline Bennett, my mother-in-law, and Martin, whoever the hell he was. I made my way down to the main concourse and lobby of the hotel and arrived at the Chez Stefan just before 8 o'clock. The maitre d' looked me up and down and gave me a full screening. I could see in his eyes a look of, he doesn't belong here, especially when he spotted the large golden badge affixed to my belt. Welcome to the Chez Stefan, sir. Is there something I can assist you with? He asked with a plastic smile. Damn, he wasn't even gonna ask me if I had a reservation. I'm expecting some people, I replied. Perhaps you would like to wait for your party outside, he suggested. God, I really wanted to punch this guy in the throat. Any reason I can't wait inside instead? I asked, challenging him. I'm sorry, sir, but the Chez Stefan only takes reservations, and all of our seatings are booked for the remainder of the evening. Perhaps. He tried to finish. Patrick, Caroline interrupted. The maitre d' immediately stood at near attention. It was obvious that he knew Caroline and the man with her. Patrick, she exclaimed again as she embraced me. Oh, so good to see you. It is good to see you too, Caroline, I replied. And it was. Caroline looked incredible for a woman just shy of 55 years of age. Behind Caroline came a gentleman who was nearly as tall as me, but carried a good 40 to 50 more pounds than me. He was in his late 50s or early 60s, had a round and jowly face, wore glasses, was shaved, and had advanced male pattern baldness. To his credit, he didn't try to compensate for the baldness, but seemed to embrace it. He seemed fairly energetic and jovial. You might say he seemed to have the personality of a slightly more sincere salesman. He was dressed incredibly well in a tailor-made suit that probably cost a good percentage of my annual salary. Patrick, Caroline said, taking the man by the arm, I want you to meet Martin. Martin, this is Patrick, she said with a beaming smile. Pleased to meet you, he said as we shook hands. I'm Martin Belmont. I want you to know, Sheriff, what a pleasure it is to finally meet you. I've heard a great deal about you. I am absolutely in awe of what you did for that little girl. Just doing my job, I said, embarrassed by the flattery. Somehow, the man was growing on me, and I started to sense myself actually liking this man. Oh, such modesty, Martin chuckled. I could never do what you do, and I have the utmost respect for our men and women in law enforcement. It is an honor to have you as our guest tonight. Please, shall we go in? After you both, I said, holding the door and giving the maitre d' a look of satisfaction. The maitre d' immediately launched into a total suck-up mode. Mr. Belmont and Ms. Bennett, it is so good to have you with us at the Chez Stefan again. Please follow me. We have a quiet table prepared for you in the bar, and your dinner table will be ready precisely at 8:30, he said, grabbing 3 leather-bound drink menus. The maitre d' led us into the most ornate and immaculate bar I had ever seen. Even the bar's wait staff dressed better than I did on most occasions. Like the menu in the restaurant, the drink menus didn't have prices, nor did the wine list. Martin obviously knew his wines and didn't even glance at the list before ordering an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon from 1969. The maitre d' looked at me and said, "And for you, sir?" "I'll just have a pint of Killian's Irish Red, if you have it," I said politely. "Of course, sir," he said. "Your waitress will return with your drinks shortly." The maitre d', no doubt, was thinking this is the most expensive bar in the city and this prick orders a friggin' beer? Oh well, I was thirsty and I didn't much care for wine. A very cute, college-age waitress with short blonde hair brought the bottle of wine, 2 empty glasses, and 1 gigantic glass of Killian's to our table. The beer was ice-cold with a frothy head that was spilling down the side of the vessel. "Wow," Martin said, chuckling. "I'm not much of a beer-drinking man myself, but that beer looks fantastic. I won't even ask how much that bottle of wine cost," I said, smiling. "This is by far the most fantastic bar and restaurant I've ever set foot in," I said, looking around at the place. There seemed to be more marble in the bar and restaurant than the Taj Mahal. "Caroline and I like to come here about once a month or so. The drinks are exceptional, the service is first-rate, and the food is incredible," Martin explained. We spent the next 20 minutes with small talk and getting to know Martin. Martin was a real estate developer in Minneapolis who had amassed a fortune on numerous projects and properties in the Twin Cities as well as throughout the upper Midwest. He had developed properties and put up buildings in Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and numerous other cities, and had more projects currently in development. One of his luxury apartment buildings in downtown Minneapolis generated over $5 million a month in rent alone. He grew up in St. Cloud, just 90 minutes northwest of the Twin Cities. He was, by every measure, a self-made man. At 8:30 a.m. waiter escorted us to a very private table not far from where a man was softly playing a piano. The music was soft and soothing and provided the perfect complement to the overall ambience of the bar and restaurant. As Martin had stated, the food was incredible. I ordered the stuffed crab and it was absolutely amazing. Martin had insisted on dessert, and we all ordered a round of chocolate mousse, which Clarissa would have loved. She is a phenomenal chocolate fiend, and it is a huge weakness of hers. I was momentarily saddened by the thought before Martin snapped me back into the conversation with another boisterous tale of a real estate development deal that had nearly fallen through. He was a genuinely charming man. Even though he and Caroline might not have been anyone's idea of a physical match, as far as attractiveness, it was clear that they were very compatible and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. For some reason, the match worked. We stayed in the restaurant visiting until almost 11:30. I was just about to end the conversation and try to politely excuse myself when Martin interjected, "Well, I think that I've had enough excitement for one evening, and I think I have battered poor Patrick with enough stories for one sitting." The three of us stood up and made our way through the restaurant and back out into the main concourse of the hotel lobby. I had intended to walk Martin and Caroline to the front door when Martin stopped in the middle of the large open space. "Patrick," he said, extending his hand again, "it has been a true honor and a pleasure to finally get to meet you. Your exploits as a lawman are the stuff of legends, and I want you to know that I hold you in the highest regard." "Thank you, Martin," I said. "That is a very warm sentiment." "It's the truth, Patrick. It's the truth," he said, turning toward Caroline. The two of them took both of each other's hands in their own. "So I will see you in a few hours, then?" he asked Caroline. "Absolutely, babe," she replied. "Thank you." And the two of them kissed several times before Martin turned and walked toward the main doors of the hotel to his waiting car and driver outside. "Isn't he something?" Yeah, he certainly is," I responded, dumbfounded. Caroline locked her arms in mine and proceeded to walk me toward the elevator. She sighed deeply. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be incredibly difficult for you to hear, my dear. But you need to hear it because you deserve to hear it, and because you are too good of a man and don't deserve to be treated the way that you are. Clarissa and I are in a rough place," I admitted. "But we'll get through this, I'm sure. I have hope that she will eventually find a cure, so to speak, and we will be able to move forward from this. I asked her to take these 2 weeks to really think about things, and I truly believe that she will." "Oh, Patrick," she said, sympathetically, "you are such a good man for believing that. And I wish that I could tell you that you are right, but you're not. Please, please, please don't hate me for telling you this. But," she said, looking down, "Clarissa is having an affair." I felt like a bomb went off. Impossible. There was no way. Absolutely no way possible. "You're wrong," I said, shaking my head and sitting straight up. "That's impossible. Clarissa has her own issues with sex. If she can't even have sex with me, there's no way she could with someone else, especially a stranger." "It isn't a stranger, Patrick," she said. Betrayal often comes from those who are closest to us. In this case, it is your wife and a friend of yours. My mind was racing. Who could it possibly be? I can't say for sure, but I speak with Clarissa nearly every night. Even though you and I have had our moments of passion, she is still my daughter, and I know my daughter well. I sat up on the edge of the bed. Caroline sat up next to me and wrapped her arms around me for support. This can't be, I groped. This all just doesn't make any sense. No affairs do, Patrick. Not even ours. But if it comforts you, then know that my daughter's betrayal of you began long ago. What? I demanded. You knew she was having an affair? I'm so sorry, Patrick. I felt terrible and ashamed that Clarissa would treat you that way. She kissed me on my cheek. You are such a good man and you don't deserve this, Patrick. I didn't deserve it with Dale, and you don't deserve this with Clarissa. I struggled to make some connection to all of this. I thought about all the changes over the last few years. Clarissa's refusal to do anything to help her low testosterone condition. Was that possibly just a ruse to keep from having sex with me in order to satisfy a lover? Oh God. All of the excuses, the reasons for not wanting sex. All of the general bitchiness that I have had to endure. The reasons for not wanting to visit me while I lay on my near-death bed after the shooting. All of the excuses for how the shooting affected her and the boys. Encouraging the boys to go to public school this year instead of being homeschooled. Me working a day shift. The incessant lapse in doing housework or work on the farm when I was working myself, or when I was hospitalized. The boys' references to their mother being on the computer constantly. The cryptic phone calls. The insistence on having the latest and greatest smartphone. With my work schedule, Clarissa would have had all the time in the world to initiate or be seduced into an affair. The weekend shopping trips she had been taking over the last year with her friends. Did they really happen? Or was it yet another lie to cover up time spent with a lover? God, I felt like the stupidest man in the world. When had it all started? It had to be shortly before, or just after we moved to the farm. It was right about then when the changes in Clarissa most became noticeable, and her absolute refusal to do anything about her so-called medical condition was simply the capstone to a bridge full of lies and deceit. God, I think I am going to be sick, I said. Patrick, listen to me, Caroline said sternly. Patrick, this is not your fault. What happened with Clarissa is not your fault. None of this is your fault. Who? I wondered out loud. Who could it be? Do you have any idea? Caroline shook her head. No, I don't. All I know is that it is someone you are close with. Someone you work with, perhaps? A friend you spend time with? Someone from church? Impossible. None of the guys I work with would be that stupid, and we really don't socialize that much. I'm so sorry, Patrick. I really truly am. Please don't hate me, Patrick, Caroline said softly. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to remind you of how good of a person you are, and because you deserve the truth. I appreciate that, Caroline, I said. Clarissa will always be my daughter. She and my grandsons will always have to come first. You know that, deep down. And secondly, if this all goes the way I expect, then you and Clarissa will almost certainly get a divorce. No matter how I looked at it, my marriage had been dealt a fatal blow by Clarissa. Caroline left a few minutes later, and I could not sleep that night. Next morning, I didn't worry about attending the Saturday session of the conference since I knew that I wasn't going to be there for the rest of it. Anyway, I wasted no time in packing my stuff. I pretty much just threw everything together and then called the front desk to have the valet bring my car to the main entrance. I didn't even bother to officially check out of the hotel, such was the depth of my anger. I just wanted to get back on the road, to get back home and face the coming onslaught and get it over with. I threw everything I had in the back seat of the big Crown Vic and headed out of the parking lot towards the interstate that would take me back home. The grotesque feeling I now had gnawing at me in the pit of my stomach matched perfectly with the mood I was currently in. I began to wonder what the direction of my life would be from here on out. How would this affect my relationship with my boys? How would this affect my job? Our relationships with our friends? So many questions I had, and currently had no answers for them. I was about an hour west of Minneapolis when I realized that I should probably give Sheriff Roberts a call. I decided to simply tell him that we had a family emergency that Clarissa needed me home for, and that I would try and make the rest of the conference if I was able to. I hoped that it would satisfy Bud for the time being and allow me to think of a better excuse over the next day or so. After all, the department and the county were paying quite a bit of money for me to attend the conference, and I was new enough in the job that I didn't want to disappoint Bud either. I reached for my department phone and punched the speed dial for Bud's cell phone. The phone rang approximately 6 times before going to Bud's voicemail. It wasn't all that unusual, as I knew that he often liked to be inaccessible for at least a few hours each weekend that he spent with his wife Margaline. Margaline was about the same age as my mother-in-law, and although still attractive, she couldn't hold a candle to Caroline. Not even a little bit. I decided it was important enough, so I called directly to his house phone. After a couple of rings, Margaline answered the phone. Hello? I had to admit Margaline did have a very pleasant-sounding voice. Margaline? Yes, who is it? Margaline, this is Patrick Quinn. Oh, Patrick, hello, she exclaimed. How is the law enforcement conference going in the big city? It's going very well. Lots to learn, I lied. Truth is, it was as boring as shit most of the time. But before I could go on, Margaline interjected. Yeah, that's what Bud says. Actually, he says he is learning more at the hotel bar, just gabbing away with all of the rest of the police chiefs and sheriffs there. Bud told me a little while ago that you two are going to the hockey game tonight. I had to catch myself. I'm sorry, I said. What was that? You cut out on me for a sec. I lied. Bud says that everyone does more networking after hours than during class. I think it is neat that the two of you can attend that conference together, she went on. He said you two are going to the game tonight. I was stunned, and an ice-cold wave washed over my stomach. If not for my training, I'm sure that I would have lost control and slammed my cruiser into a concrete barrier or bridge abutment. I started to feel shaky all over as the revelation hit me. Margaline had no idea that Bud was no longer at the conference. But if the good sheriff wasn't in Minneapolis, where could he be? The only place he could possibly be, at my house, screwing my wife. I must have spaced off for a few moments. Patrick? Margaline asked. Are you still there, hon? I regained focus. Yes I am. I'm sorry, it's been such a long day, I'm not even sure what I called about. I must have hit the wrong number for Bud when I was trying to call him. Oh, okay, she replied, sounding just as confused as me. Well, tell Bud to give me a call. I'm sure you'll probably see him there soon. Gotta be close to dinner time, isn't it? Yeah, dinner. Right. God. I was trying to sound normal, but obviously failing. I had to end the conversation now. Well, I better run. Sorry for the mix-up. I hung up before she could even reply. There was an off-ramp ahead and a decent-sized truck stop. I knew I needed to get off the road and clear my head for a bit, or else I was going to space off and get into a wreck. I pulled into the large truck stop and parked on the automobile side and went into the diner. I went into the bathroom to pee and also to wash up. I thought freshening up a bit might help to calm my nerves. I knew it was going to be a long night ahead, so I grabbed a tall coffee while I was in there. I sat down in one of the booths and started to go over everything I knew. Caroline obviously knew something was going on with Clarissa and had been for a year or more. I suspected or knew that Caroline wasn't going to give me specific details because that would invariably lead to Clarissa knowing who I got the information from. Caroline said that Clarissa was probably screwing someone I knew, someone I possibly worked with. Considering that I wasn't really close with anyone else on the department besides Bud Roberts himself, that left him as the only possible suspect. Combine that with the fact Bud's own wife obviously thought he was 200 miles away from home, pretty much confirmed everything I needed to know. How could I have not seen this? Jesus, I felt stupid. After an hour or so and lots of coffee, I felt steady enough to get back on the road again. I should have eaten something, but I didn't think I could keep anything down. My stomach was literally in a knot. 2 hours later, I was back in Mason County, and the scenery started to look familiar again. I took the exit off the interstate and headed west towards US 120 and then north on 120 until I hit Rattlesnake Road. Once I made the turn west, I pulled over to the side and made a mental preparation for what I would see. Obviously, Bud wasn't in Minneapolis and he obviously wasn't home. And if he wasn't either of those two places, then he was most likely at my house. The only thing I could hope for was that Clarissa would have the good sense to send the boys away for the weekend if she was going to be in our house screwing my boss. I turned off the headlights and crept slowly over the hill until the farmhouse was in sight. When I was about 200 feet from the driveway, I parked the cruiser and killed the engine and walked the rest of the way home. Soon, the unmistakable sight of a large white SUV was sitting parked in front of the garage, easily visible under the yard light. The downstairs lights were on and the shades were all down. No upstairs bedroom or bathroom lights were on. I walked the last 200 feet and slowly made my way toward the front door. I scanned all the windows for signs of movement inside. As I did so, the obvious form of a man crossed in front of the window in the dining room. I gently crept up on the porch and carefully peered inside. Sure enough, there was my lovely wife Clarissa, dressed only in her satin nightgown and an open bathrobe on. Next to her with his hand tenderly caressing her back was none other than Sheriff William Bud Roberts, dressed only in a pair of boxers and a t-shirt. They looked as comfortable and at home as the people you would find in any Norman Rockwell painting. The only difference was, they were a couple of cheating a-holes who were cheating on me in my own home. I watched them for a few minutes. From their body language, they looked like they were having a minor disagreement about something. The thick front windows prevented me from hearing exactly what they were saying. But after a short time, Clarissa obviously relented on some topic, and she leaned in to hug Bud while Bud kissed her gently on the forehead. They embraced for a short while before Clarissa leaned back and looked up at Bud before they shared a very intimate and passionate kiss. That was too much for me. My blood pressure went from already high to off the chart. I was furious as I stood up and burst through the front door of my house like a tornado. Thank God it wasn't locked, so I didn't have to kick it in. My abrupt intrusion obviously caught them off guard. Amazingly and instinctively, Bud actually grabbed Clarissa by the shoulders and placed her in front of himself, using her as a human shield against whatever his mind thought was invading the house. "Patrick," Clarissa gasped, realizing it was me. "Oh my God. What the hell are you doing here?" Bud demanded. "You're supposed to be in Minneapolis." "Yeah, I know," I said slowly and steadily, walking toward the scantily clad couple. "Funny thing is, Bud, so are you." I was fuming as I continued walking toward them. "Now look, Patrick," Bud said, holding his hand out towards me. "I don't know what you think this is, but this is not what it looks like." I stopped in my tracks. "Are you stupid, Bud? Or do you just think that I'm that stupid?" "No, Patrick, I don't think you are stupid. I wouldn't have hired you if I did," Bud replied weakly, as Clarissa removed herself from Bud's grasp. "Because," I continued, "what it looks like to me is that my longtime friend and current boss has been screwing my wife," I said sarcastically. "And you know what they always say. First impressions are usually right." Clarissa said nothing as she distanced herself from both me and Bud. The only thing she could do was look down in shame and cinch her bathrobe closed. "All right, Patrick. Fair enough," Bud said. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Oh, well, apology accepted, Bud. Tell me something. How long have you two been screwing?" "It isn't like that," Clarissa interrupted. "It isn't like that at all. What Clarissa means, Patrick, is that she and I aren't just having an affair. She and I are in love and intend to be together when this is all over with," Bud explained nonchalantly. "What do you mean when this is all over with? And when did this actually start? Huh, how long has this shit been going on?" I demanded, but let out a sigh. "It started before I hired you, Patrick. It was worse than I thought. I started working for you almost 2 years ago." "Yeah, that's about right." "It ends," I demanded. "It ends right now." "Not gonna happen, pal." Clarissa continued to say nothing, although tears were now streaming down her cheeks. "And why not?" "Because this ends with Clarissa and I being together, Patrick, and it ends when I say it ends. Not you. As I said, we have already made plans." "Oh," I said. "Why don't you at least do me the courtesy of filling me in on these plans?" "Okay," Bud said, walking closer to me. "Clarissa and I are in love. We have been for quite some time. I'm going to keep you in your current position until the election is over with next fall. After that, I will publicly announce my separation from Margaline, and Clarissa will eventually separate from you. After the dust settles down from our respective situations, then Clarissa and I will take our relationship to the next level." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only were they planning on continuing their affair, they were planning on probably getting married. "And what about me?" I asked. "How are you going to explain to the public that you are having an affair with my wife? What are you going to do if I end up telling Margaline about all of this?" "Christ, Bud. She still thinks you're at that damned conference too." Bud's face got stone cold and lost all expression. "Patrick, Margaline is not going to find out, because you are not going to say a goddamned word about it. And my relationship with Clarissa is not going public until after you and she are already divorced. I've seen to everything, Patrick. There is no way for this thing to end with you and Clarissa still being together." "Really? How do you think you are going to stop me?" I dared. "Patrick, I have numerous ways to stop you. Most of them are already in place. I have a dozen reports, violations, investigations, and complaints just waiting in the wings. If I even sniff for a second that you aren't playing your part in this, I will absolutely snap your career in two. You got me? I will break you, professionally. You'll be a pariah, no matter how many times you've been shot trying to save little girls. You're now my chief deputy. You have a lot of control over department money and program oversight. You oversee investigations, You write a lot of reports. Maybe there are one or two things from your time as a deputy that followed you into your new position, things I didn't know about at the time but have suddenly come to light now that you're chief deputy. Maybe a certain gentleman in the community named Elmer Suggs has been dying to file a complaint of police brutality against you, and now we've decided to look into the matter based on some new evidence that has arisen. Elmer Suggs? No way. I was one of the few people that actually showed any compassion towards that man. You see, Patrick, Bud continued, gaining more confidence, I have thought this through and thoroughly. I didn't become sheriff by being stupid. Everything I do in this job has been a result of a calculated decision and meticulous planning. I stood there seething. Why? Why would you do this to a friend, Bud? For a moment, Bud genuinely looked sympathetic. I'm sorry, Patrick. I'm sorry that you are married to Clarissa and all of this is necessary. But I have had feelings for her for quite some time. He went over and stood next to Clarissa and added the insult of putting his arm around her. I simply decided that I had to have her. I decided that I needed to be sheriff, and I became sheriff. I'm a man who gets what he wants, Patrick. I looked at Clarissa. She was still too embarrassed or ashamed to even look at me. I think the best thing, Patrick, would be for you to pack some things and find a place to stay for a while, Bud said. Oh, hell no. If I leave here tonight, your bum is leaving too. I may have walked in on this mess tonight, but I'm sure as hell not going to leave here and turn my back on it. If you two are going to pull this shit, you sure as hell aren't going to do it in my house. If you insist on screwing and having an affair, I probably can't stop you. You're right about that. But this is my house, and I will not allow it to happen here. Patrick, I really don't think you're in the position to make any demands right now. Clarissa and I have already decided what is going to happen, and if there is anything else that needs to be said, it is simply that we should agree that whatever I decide is inevitable. Well, Bud, I have a .38 service revolver strapped to my belt right now that says I have the right to make any demand I want to in my own house. And it also says that a man standing in my kitchen dressed in a t-shirt and underwear had better listen. Both Bud and Clarissa stood back as I opened my coat to show the revolver perched on my hip. Whoa, Patrick, let's not do anything stupid right now. Go pack your shit, Bud. If it makes you feel better, I'm not staying either. I don't really have a desire to wake up in the same house as my bitch of a wife, either. But both of us are going to leave here tonight. You got me? All right, Patrick. Fair enough. But I need your assurance that you won't hurt Clarissa if I leave. Well, Bud, I smiled. If it makes you feel better, the only person whose brains I want to blow out right now more than my own are yours. So, no, I'm not going to hurt the mother of my kids. But things are going to get ugly if you refuse to leave my house tonight. Fair enough, I'll go get my things now. Bud turned to head upstairs and I followed him. As we got to the top of the stairs, he turned into the guest bedroom and the room and bed were a mess. At least they had a tiny shred of decency not to screw in my own bed, for God's sake. I made a beeline for the master bedroom and furiously began ripping clothes out of the closet and my dressers. Clarissa followed me into the room. Bud gave her a worried glance as she did so. She shut the door behind her and approached me from behind and put her hand on my shoulder. Patrick, she said sobbing, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you like this. Don't. I yelled, reeling from her touch like a burned man. Don't touch me. You do not have the right to touch me without my permission ever again. Any rights and privileges you ever had in this marriage disappeared the minute you stopped being my wife and started being Bud Roberts' bitch. Clarissa winced and reeled at the insult. For years, you have been coming up with bullshit excuses for why we couldn't be intimate. Years worth of rejection because of your so-called health. Well, Haley effing Luya. It is a miracle. Apparently, Bud Roberts juice was the magic, natural cure you were looking for all this time. This is not going to end well for you, bitch. Not for you. Neither for your love. I stand here and swore in the name of devil, I will destroy you and your lover. She just stood there sobbing as I packed and lobbed insults. Are you proud of yourself? I growled. Does it make you happy knowing that you've completely destroyed our family? Taken our kids' father away from them? For some reason, the last thing I did before I stormed out of the room was to rifle through both nightstands. When I opened the drawer on Clarissa's side of the bed, what I saw was a virtual slap in the face. I reached in and picked up a tube of medical cream that was inside and briefly studied the label on the outside. The cream was called androsterone, and it was a prescription treatment for low testosterone in women. I stood there holding the tube of cream in my hands in total disbelief. I looked at Clarissa, who just held her hands to her mouth. She was in shock at my discovery, too, although she didn't seem to hide it well.